Yeah, right. So we're changing diseases now. So we're going into crown rot, which is a fungal disease, stubble-borne disease. It's not a root pathogen. I'll show you how it works. Just quickly want to acknowledge, so everything I'll talk about here is funded by GRDC, obviously supported through Prime Ministries. But I'm also talking about a fair bit of collaborative work we've done on national variety trials and with the variety-specific agronomy package. And a lot of our stuff we use Predicta B, which you'll hear about. Okay, I get paid to put this up every talk. So this is the life cycle of crown rot, okay? Everyone starts pulling out their things, heard it all before, nothing new, but this is critical, okay? Fungal-borne, stubble-borne pathogen survives in all our winter cereals, our grasses, moist soil, get infection. Okay, this is the critical point here. You get infection in the base of the plant, and that becomes a pinch point. So it's about stress kicks in, stops the ability to move water past that, and that's when you get your whiteheads. And that can be temperature stress or running out of moisture. Okay, if you get no stress, you pump past this and it's fine, you'll fill the heads normally. Okay, so with a year like last year, a lot of whiteheads around, these basal infections become a pinch point and it's hard to get past them. So how important is this pinch point? Okay, so this is some work from Walgett 2012 we've been doing with Matt Gardner with the VSAP project. So what he did is he put in neutron access tubes down to 1.5 metres, looking at the water down the profile. And what we can pull apart, so where Jeremy was pulling apart with varieties, this is looking at no added crown rot or where we've inoculated with crown rot. Okay, 2012 at Walgett was a late stress. So you look here, we had 225 mils of, this is plant available water, it's stem elongation, so very good soils. We weren't seeing differential use where we had crown rot or not crown rot till we pulled out here to grain fill, so very late stress in 2012. So we started to separate here, and by maturity, where we had crown rot, which is the triangles up the top here, we left an extra 25 mils behind. So that pinch point stopped us pulling that water from depth, and we left 25 mils in the profile. Okay, that's what that pinch point does. 25 mils, we've talked about water now. What did that actually translate to? So this was in Caparoy Durham, on the 28th of May at Walgett. So at 25 mils, the ability to pull that up, we went from 3.9 tonnes per hectare down to 3.05, so we lost 22% of our yield, and our screenings went from 8% to 20%. Okay, so that deep water is important. We had this at 2 sites last year. I'll talk about Rowena first, but we also had it at Garah. Rowena is interesting. Pretty much the same starting moisture as you saw at Walgett, maybe a little bit higher. So at stem elongation, we had about 270 mils of plant available water. What happened last year, but as we started to separate, so crown rot up the top, no crown rot down the bottom. Even by flag leaf emergence, we started to pull apart in our moisture usage. Okay, this is a function of those warmer temperatures over winter. We're actually running bigger biomass crops because of those warmer temperatures. So it started kicking in on our water use, and when you look at it across the things, we had 20 mils difference by here. It had blown out to 32, these aren't additive, blown out to 32, was out to 38, and by harvest, there was 46 mils, so that pinch point had left behind 46 mils. So this was mainly below 80 centimetres. So what did that mean? Okay, so stress kicking in earlier. We didn't have crown rot, we had 3.3 tonnes per hectare. Where we did, we only got 1.18. We lost 64, so we lost 64% of our yields. Screenings went from nearly 7% up to 19%. Okay, so this is what that loss of moisture, inability to pull that moisture up, is doing to the disease. Okay, Garah. Okay, the Garah grower who was in contact with the Rowena one wanted to know why the hell this guy's crop did a lot better than his. What's the automatic thing? Didn't have anywhere near the stored water. So this guy, even though the soil could hold it, his fellow had only stored about 160, so he's going in with a lot less. Well, as you can see again, crown rot up the top, no crown rot down the bottom. We started separating out again at flag leaf, those warmer conditions, earlier stress. We got a pretty similar number as Walgett. It was 27 mils by the end that we left behind where we had crown rot. What's that mean? Less stored water, lower yield potential. So without crown rot, we only had 2 tonnes. But where we did lose that and got this stress, we lost 55% of our yield still, and our screenings went from 6% up to 15%. Okay, so this is the importance. See how crown rot's working. Becomes a pinch point in the base of the plant. You can't get that moisture up to fill the heads, and this is where you get the repercussions. Okay, and this is where we talked here about this plant available water and that water use efficiency. And John Kierkegaard did some stuff down south that certainly that deeper water does have a higher water use efficiency. And certainly for us in the north, it's critical. And this is where the nematodes, if they reduce ability to do that, it exacerbates our crown rot too. Okay, how do you actually know your risk of crown rot? Longy's going to talk about crown analytical services. You can actually pull stubble out of your paddock, send it off, it gets rated, and they send it over us and we can plate it. And based on the number of primary tillers that are infected with the crown rot fungus, you've got some idea of what your inoculum load is for the following season. So this is leading into 2013 sowing, and this is the recovery across about 160 samples that got sent in. You know, so some of them are quite high, nearly 100% of the plants were infected with crown rot. So we've got rough risk categories around that as to what that'll mean. So if we've got under 12%, we call it a low risk, 47% of paddocks were in the low risk, 16 in the medium, which was between 12 and 24, and above 24% of the plants infected, we call that a high risk. Okay, so we can certainly plate it, and that'll give you some idea of what's in your paddock. The problem is, what if there's no stubble to plate? So you've fallowed in and out of cotton. Who's been having problems with crown rot after cotton? No one? Certainly has been some issues, which we'll go into. Okay, and it also doesn't take into account the stubble load. So you could have pulled, in theory, the 50 bits of stubble, only 50 bits of stubble in the paddock, unlikely, but there is the possibility there. You plate those, they're high, so it doesn't take into account that. So the thing we've been playing around with is DNA sampling, a test offered by SARDI called Predicta B. So this is a soil-based test. So what we're trying to sort out with them, it's a soil-based test, trying to pick up a stubble-borne pathogen. So what they do is you take your soil samples, they extract the total DNA out, they've got specific probes, they can pick up the different pathogens. So it's very sensitive for the particular pathogens. Okay, we did some survey work. You probably heard us talk about nematodes from 2010, 2012, central New South Wales up into northern New South Wales. It was 248 paddocks a year anyway. So this is the crown rot data. So what we could do is we actually had 307 comparisons across that year. We had a starting Predicta B number at sowing, and we actually went in and pulled plants and found out what the level of infection was based on plating. Okay, so a prediction with DNA, Predicta B at sowing, what actually eventuated in the crop. Okay, here's the Predicta B risk categories based on log DNA, so low down here, below detection, and this is what our ratings in terms of percentage of plants that get infected. Defies the nil, but we set it at 2. Okay, so a high level infection is greater than 25% of your plants got infected. Okay, so what happened? So out of the 370 paddocks, this is where we pretty much predicted. So it said it was going to be high, and we got greater than 25% of the plants infected. You know, it said it was medium, we got between 11 and 24. Okay, 35% of the paddocks, it was spot on. Who would expect this to be 100%? There's a lot goes on between here, okay? So this is detecting what's in your stubble. You've got issues there with how much disturbance you get in your sowing process. You can actually bust some of this up, spread it more, comes in contact. So you could actually take and certainly Kelly chaining, you could take a low level and probably end up spreading that and end up with a high number of plants infected. So what you look at, if you look within one risk category, so Predicta B said it was going to be medium, but we end up with high, or Predicta B said it was medium, we're going to end up with low. 75% of the time it's getting it right, okay, within that one risk category. So it's a pretty good indication. 3% of paddocks had over-predicted, so it said it was high and we end up with low, so that could have been inter-row sowing, got away with it. But then there was also 22% of paddocks. Okay, so this was all targeted on the previous cereal rows where we took our cores, and you'll hear me talk about spiking with stubble. None of these samples were spiked. Okay, so this is the red bits in red for a reason. This is what we worry about. So Predicta B said it was low, but we end up with over 25% of our plants infected with the crown rot fungus. So what we've been looking into with SARDI is why this is happening. Certainly there's a fair indication there was an issue after a wetter summer in 2010. We can get decomposition of the crown, so it breaks down because there's moisture, but you still get survival in the above ground stubble. So some of those sites we had like 5% survival in the crown, but still 50% in the above ground stubble. Predicta B, targeted at the old rows, is very good at picking up what's in the crown. It's not good at picking up what's in the standing stubble. Okay, so what we've played with them is actually trying to get this to work a bit better. So what we played with leading into this year is actually spiking the samples, DNA samples, with a set amount of stubble. Taking the lowest node, cutting that and adding that in. Okay, just to look at that, so we had a number of sites we had it. So we had no stubble, we just punched them on the old row. This is the Predicta B number and the risk category. Red's high risk, yellow's a medium risk, low's white. So it didn't make a difference at Bithrami. It was a high risk whether we didn't spike it with stubble or whether we added stubble in, but certainly Canam we picked it up and raised those up. Okay, so what we need to go back, we're going back at the moment and pulling plants from 3 check varieties at each site. We need to establish whether this is over-predicting the risk. So we'll actually plate what was our levels of infection and is this the way to get around it. But certainly for this year, the recommendation with Predicta B, sample on the previous cereal rows, so if you can see them, target them. You need to do 30 small crawls across the paddock, total of 500 grams. Okay, guys have been going in there doing a nutrient test, punching 3 to 6 cores in a paddock, going in a row, sweeping the stubble away, split some off, send it off to Predicta B, wonder why it doesn't pick up crown rot. Who expected it would pick up crown rot? You got rid of all the stubble. It shouldn't. If it had it, there was something wrong with the test. Okay, so if you want to do a nutrient test and split it off, you'll get a good number on your nematodes potentially, but you're not going to get a very good number on your crown rot. If you do get stubble in there, don't remove it from the sample. Certainly indicate the depth of sampling, whether it's 0 to 15 or 0 to 30, and they can use that in their feedback. And certainly adding that stubble as recommended, the set number of pieces, reduces your failure to warn. So you're erring on the side of caution. So if you know it's clean after that, then you're pretty safe. Why sample? Besides to make longy rich? Which none of us want to do that. Okay, so what we did is we went into, there's 27 sites up, you can count how many in each, but a range of our pathology trials, some grain and graze trials, and these are all your serial NVT trials. Okay, so last year we went in and we cored each of the 6 ranges separate and kept them as a separate sample for that site. So we look at variability across the site. Okay, Predicta B could pick up we've heard our Pradolenchus neglectus, Pradolenchus thorni, so these are our 2 main root lesion nematodes. Our crown rot, common root rot and pythium, okay? Let's just focus on these ones here. The colours of the giveaway. Okay, so red is a high risk, yellow is a moderate risk, and then white's the low risk, and below detection means it was too low. Okay, so these are all growers' paddocks where a trial went into it. They're all commercial paddocks where we put a trial, or NVT put a trial. Okay, as you can see here, there's a range of sites which have got a moderate risk, so Narrabri had a moderate risk of Pradolenchus thorni and bladder. There's a range here. It's hard to get a site in the north, which you know all too well from farming up here. It's hard to get a site that's a low risk for crown rot. It's just surviving between seasons. Okay, but it's interesting to know this. And why would we want to know this information? I'll point one out here, okay? We've had issues with fallowing in and out of cotton and still getting a fair bit of crown rot. So still cereal stubble, your pupae busted up. You can't see any stubble and you think, I haven't got a crown rot problem. We went into Spring Ridge, couldn't see any wheat stubble. Predicta B could pick up, we had a moderate risk. And when you look at that site, I haven't got it on here, but we had whiteheads everywhere. Okay, so it could pick it up. So if it's within the soil, Predicta B will pick it up. Okay, the other one, just an example. What about Narrabri? Okay, so this was a grower's paddock. Moderate risk of Pradolenchus thorni, moderate risk of crown rot. This is the yields off that site. So just in the plots, we didn't inoculate with crown rot. This is just background infections. So as I said, moderate nematodes, Pradolenchus thorni, moderate crown rot. Okay, I'll give it away straight away. This is what the grower commercially sowed in that paddock in 2013. Caproid durum, very susceptible to crown rot. Okay, so if we had have actually been kind enough to give this to grower at sowing, he probably would have kicked us off his paddock. But if they had to use that information, they could have actually changed variety choice, which could have had big implications. So if you had to change from Caproid, gone for something with some increased tolerance, oops, I'm going the wrong way here. Had a grown Caproid gone into Suntop, would have got an extra 1.6 tonnes yield last year. And even now, I guess, looking at the difference between Gregory, so Gregory, which is a bit more susceptible, that had gone from Gregory into Suntop 0.77. It's actually knowing this information is pretty critical and you can make some decisions on it. How do some of the new varieties look? Okay, so we had 11 sites across central northern New South Wales up into southern Queensland last year. Looking at this added crown rot, no added crown rot at sowing by growing up on durum grain, and we obviously backgrounded all the sites at sowing. Okay, this is where the biometricians need to just turn around. There is no cross-site analysis coming up. What we got here is you've actually, so this added and unadded is a bit of a furphy, because from that table I showed you, we've gone into all these sites here, we've added or not added extra crown rot, but some of them already had crown rot there. So if you actually compare an inoculated, uninoculated at Bithramere, you look at it high infection, put a little bit more on. So all you're looking at is on a, so let's say this is our yield loss curve. See if this works. So that's increasing crown rot this way, yield this way. What you're looking at when you've already got high, so this is increasing levels, this is what's naturally at Bithramere. We've gone and added a bit more in. We're only looking at the yield loss in between those points there. Okay, so it's a bit of a falseness, okay? So this is why I've done a dodgy lack of analysis. That's my excuse. Okay, so what you can start doing, because we Predicta B'd it, you can start pulling apart what's happened at sites. So 5 of those sites, we had nil or low crown rot in our background. And what we can do is, and this is where the biometricians will do it properly later, you can look at the percentage yield compared to Gregory. So if you look at sites where we don't have crown rot in the background, Gregory tracks around 100%. So it's about similar yield to these varieties running this way. Okay, so there's no crown rot there. Gregory's fine, it'll yield all right. Okay, what do we go to sites which had a medium to high natural background level? Okay, so this is the Bithramies and these sites. This is where you still set Gregory at 100%, but you start to see these newer varieties, Suntop, Lancer, they're becoming 15-20% higher yielding than Gregory based on that background level. Okay, the red ones here we're going to see, that's inoculated. So we've got either medium or high sites, there's 11 in total here, medium or high, or they had nil low, we've gone inoculate on top of that. So we've ensured we've got 80% of our plants infected. Okay, whereas back here we're running below 10, in here we're running somewhere around 40 to 50, we're up to 80% of plants infected. This is where you see it. So compared to Gregory, Gregory always stays set at 100% because that's what we index to. You can see they start to become 20, even up to 30% higher yielding, some of these newer varieties. And when you look at it, just as a rough idea, that can mean up to 0.6 tonnes on average across those sites. It was bigger at some sites and a bit smaller at others. So yeah, certainly the key message is Gregory's still a good variety for us, but you don't want to put it into these situations here because that's when you're going to lose yield. So varieties certainly differ in their tolerance, and susceptible varieties should only targeted to low risk paddocks. So you've got to test to know that. This is the bad news. This is Rowena, sown on 30th of May. So varieties are not the sole solution. So here we're looking at blue is no added crown rot, and this is where we inoculated with a high rate. You can look at the yield loss. The yield loss is different between the blue and the red. So given a tough finish, so this is where we, in that capital, we end up with 47 mils left behind, stress from flag leaf on. Even the best of the material we've got out there is going to lose 40% yield. Okay, but you're losing 40% compared to 60, 70% down here. So how are we going with pre-breeding? This is some stuff from Phil Davies, was charged with sending stuff over. So, did he go? He's still there. They're all gone, I can say what I want now. So they're actually using rain-out shuttles. So this is how they limit the moisture to the crop to try to get the increased crown rot expression. These make good sales as well. They blow away sometimes. But yeah, so this is how they're manipulating that stress. Certainly looking here, so this is, whoops, that should have been up. But looking at this, they've got a range of pre-breeding material in here and some of the same stuff in here. So again, 11% yield loss between inoculated and uninoculated, so it wasn't a big stress site. But when you look at it, there is a range of varieties. So this is uninoculated. You've got some varieties that are a little bit higher yielding up here. But the interest is really in the presence of crown rot. God, these are moved on me. So that was meant to be up here on Suntop. They've got some that are an extra 0.3 high yielding. So I guess we really want to see that under higher pressure and across sites. And I'm dobbing in them into talk at the updates next year rather than me. Okay, I've got time. Stress interaction. So this is from Gurley 2012, probably doesn't come out. 45% whiteheads on the 9th of October in Caparoy, Durham. 2 days of hot, windy weather. We went from 85% to 85% whiteheads. Okay, the pinch point, the infection's all back here. It just hasn't had the moisture, the temperature stress to bring it out and express those whiteheads. So they were shutting down anyway. So what if we actually bring our grain fill back a week or two with sowing time? And I guess what you really run into there, I don't know whether Pete Martin talks tomorrow, I think. And so very, very interesting list. But what you're really running there is you're playing off this frost risk versus the heat stress risk. Okay, and you'll hear Pete Martin talk about it tomorrow, very good talk. What I'm talking about is actually think of it in perspective of crown rot as well. Okay, so here we are, we're at Garah, so we end up with frost, I'll give it away. Garah here, a low level of Praelinchus thorni, a low level of crown rot. I should acknowledge that up front. Okay, this is where we didn't add crown rots. This is the yield on a 1st of May sowing at Garah. Okay, you can see some of these are dropped off. We actually noted we had frost in the quick durums, the quicker bread wheats and the quicker barleys on that early sowing time. The exception being dart, which seemed to be quick enough, it actually got through it. Okay, so we have got yield loss there. If you look at the second sowing time, no yield loss. These ones here, so Impala jumps dramatically because it didn't get frosted. Okay, so that's without the addition of crown rot. Yes, you sow on the 1st of May, you have a higher risk of frost. But what if you actually got crown rot? Okay, so remember these all got frosted. This is our yield in the presence of crown rot. 80% of plants infected with crown rot, roughly. Okay, on an early sowing, you can see there is a range in the barley, so Commander seems to produce more than Oxford. Forget about these because they got frosted. Okay, you can see that difference, and barley actually out-yielded the best of the wheats. But what if we actually go to the next sowing time? So we've actually sown it a month later, we're pushing our grain fill back, we actually make our crown rot worse too. So when you look at it, even though we got frosted in hyperno here, the amount we lost for frost, we end up at a similar point with a later sowing with crown rot. Okay, so that increased expression with the late sowing, we end up a similar yield point. Okay, and there's not many where we get a separation. And with some of them, something like Bellary, you get an even bigger drop-off where you didn't get frosted. The other key point too, remember on the blues, this was the early sowing, we often say barley's more tolerant to crown rot. It is, but it's only an escape mechanism. It's very susceptible to infection, but when it's sown early, it tends to mature early and escape that heat stress. But if you sow it later, so if you deliberately sow it later, a month later, you can see it actually drops off. Commander still was a bit better performing than the others. So there's no frost in the red bars, but actually SunGuard become up there with Commander. So this is your expression of crown rot. So what I'm trying to say is if you sow earlier, your grain feels a bit under slightly reduced temperatures, so you don't get this increased expression of whiteheads. So this is the function of a later sowing. Even though it's quick, you push its grain fill into tougher conditions, it's susceptible, you get more whiteheads and you drop the yield off. Yeah. Okay, and this is screenings, again, all in the presence of high crown rot, 1st of May, 31st of May. So remember these guys got frosted, hyperno ended up with probably equivalent yield, but on an early sow, your screen's around 2%, you jump up to 7%. Look at Bellary, you go from 5% on a 1st of May to over 25% on a late May sowing. So it's those conditions you're trying to fill grain under. Okay, so certainly keep frost risk in perspective for 2014. I'm not saying it's a real thing out there, but if we get gun shy and go the other way, heat stress during grain fill can also knock yield dramatically, especially you've got crown rot there. You'll make your expression worse. Okay, don't want everyone coming in next year saying I sowed early and got frosted, but... and I said this, so barley varieties are all susceptible to crown rot. I still get calls every year, I thought barley was resistant to crown rot. It is not. It is a super sucker. It will build inoculum up. It tends to mature earlier, but it depends on the variety and the sowing time. So if you look at Commander on the first sowing time, 6.5% yield loss between inoculated and inoculated, 20.7 on the second sowing time, and Oxford appears worse. Okay, so if you sow a barley late, you'll still get yield loss or significant yield loss from crown rot. Have I got time for this? I'll be quick. Yeah, you're good. What about root lesion nematodes? This is where we get into the biometrician's turnaround again. Okay, what we can look at is cross NVT sites. So we're going to need more sites to do this, but this is the value of backgrounding NVT sites. So we've backgrounded the sites in central northern New South Wales for the last 2 years. And what we can do is start to pull apart sites where we've got big differences in our nematode populations, Predicta thornii, and our crown rot in different sites. Okay, I'll just pick 4 varieties out of those trials and look at them as a percentage of site mean yield. Okay, Lincoln, Gregory, Spitfire, Suntop. This is their Predicta thornii rating, very intolerant, out to moderately tolerant, and their crown rot rating, very susceptible, out to moderately susceptible. Okay, so at 4 sites where we haven't got any Predicta thornii, no crown rot, what do you reckon happens? They all track around 100% of site mean yield. So it doesn't matter what their ratings are if you don't have those pathogens there. Okay, what if we've got Predicta thornii only? We've only found 3 sites where they've got that. So what's driving your yield response there is it's Predicta thornii tolerance rating. So Lincoln's very intolerant, out to moderately tolerant. So Lincoln drops off to being around about 90% of site mean yield, and some of these others jump up to being, over 100% of site mean yield. What about where we've got only crown rot only? So this is harder because there's usually nematodes there. It's only 2 sites, so we do need more sites. This is where you're feeding off really your reaction to crown rot. So you see Lincoln, very susceptible to crown rot, drops down to about 85% site mean yield. Gregory's susceptible, or not too much further off. These guys with improved resistance, they start becoming higher yielding at those sites when that's a constraint. We've got 5 sites where we've got both. So we've got high Predicta thornii, we've got high crown rot in the background. So what are we doing there? We're actually, a variety's yield at those sites is driven by both, because you've got both constraints. The key message there is, this is where you really don't want these in your system. So very intolerant to nematodes, very susceptible to crown rot, become 70% of site mean yield. This is where these varieties with improved tolerance and some level of resistance, that's where they become 120% of site mean yield. So grow varieties with improved resistance to Predicta thornii and resistance to crown rot, you'll maximise your yield. Only grow more intolerant either intolerant to nematodes or more susceptible to crown rot if you know your risk levels. So Gregory's fine, Lincoln I probably wouldn't go near, but if you know that you haven't got those as your constraints, they're fine. But if you have got them there, you've got to avoid them. And do not grow very susceptible varieties because they can blow your soil populations out. Kirsty's already covered this, but we'll go quickly. So this is just looking at 2 NVT sites where we called every entry in the main season NVT trial. Ballara, highest starting up, these are log values, highest starting up the side here. So it started about 18,500, but a variety choice here took it from 18,500 to over 90, 100,000 up here, these varieties. Whereas we started lower here, we still get a blowout. But you can look at the relationship between varieties. The key message is, again, we've got varieties here. We don't want to be up this very susceptible end here, grown varieties up here. So I think that's Lincoln. I think you've got your Impala. Where's the amps guys? Impala's up this end too, so that'll help them with their nematodes. Okay, and I guess the thing to point out, so we talked about Spitfire, SunGuard. It's certainly not up this VS area. So Spitfire and SunGuard don't appear VS in the field, which we're trying to get to the bottom of why that's happening. Last slide, acknowledgements. So certainly all the growers who let us come and infect their paddocks with crown rot in certain plots, much appreciated. They've all got a crown rot problem, as you saw from that table. A lot of them have anyway. They've got more now. We do a lot of work with the VSAP team out of Tamworth, which was Matt Gardner's crew, but now he'll get replaced. So they say at all our northern New South Wales sites. The crew at Trangish with New South Wales DPI so our Trang and Canberra sites. Doug Lush from QDAF under contract sowed the Westmar McAllister, and I've got a pretty big team of people who actually do all the work, and I get up here and take all the credit. Done.